Hey everyone, welcome back to TV Guys, the show that has only one neighbor that we care about, and that's Mr. Rogers. Good on you, man. I'm Matt,
I'm Brian.
and today we are talking about TV's beloved trope. Now, Brian and I were talking before we started, and there's two different types of neighbors, and there's really no in between. There's that like wise neighbor that you're like, oh, this guy, he always know what he's talking about. He's great. And then there's the good gravy, this neighbor is annoying the crap out of me, and I need to get him out of here. And so those are really it. That's all you got.
Also, I'm going to point out to our neighbors, this is, I think, the first time this has ever happened, where we get on the recording and there was a little mix-up, and we both thought we were doing different episodes of the podcast.
True.
Matt came prepared to do the episode we're doing next time.
Yeah. So I'm going to find ways to work that into this episode. I don't know how. I don't know where, but it's happening.
Well, you know, if you don't work it in, straight to jail. I beat you to it.
You punk. Fine. Be that way. Be that way. Hey, well, you know what? We'll just promo it because we don't always know what's the next episode we're going to do. But the next episode we're going to talk about is we're going to rewatch the episode from season 2 of Parks and Rec, Sister City. Great episode. Love it. Fred Armisen shines. Best part of the episode for me. So we're going to talk through all of that.
He's the episode.
He really is.
There is no episode without him.
See, don't you wish we could be doing that tonight instead? You are already ready to go. But no, we are talking about our friendly neighbors or our poopy face neighbors. One of those. So we're going to kind of
both.
They can.
Some of the annoying ones are friendly.
Yeah, we can. I also have a couple of like cheats. This is a hard category too because like there's a little bit of like I can just bring them up just to talk about them, even though they don't specifically fall in the trope because they're more of like a main cast. Like, okay, here we go. We'll just throw one out. Like Kramer from Seinfeld. Kramer is the crazy next door neighbor, but because he is such a focus, he is like a central part of the show. And so do we put him in that trope or do we have him like, no, he's a main character?
Well, I had him. I'll throw another one out there that kind of falls into this category. I also mentioned Frank and Marie Barone from Everybody Loves Raymond. Ooh. Again, part of the central main cast, but they're both kooky neighbors. Like they both will barge into, you know, Jerry and Ray's house respectively with unannounced and are often unwelcome, which is kind of part of the trope.
Yeah. So let's back up to Kramer here for a second. Because I think we can talk about that because especially if, you know, that's another example. I have a couple other examples we can bring up, but you don't have a neighbor that's like such an ingrained part of the show without them kind of being a series regular or a consistent guest star. And so Kramer,
a bunch of mine are series regulars.
Yeah.
A bunch of them on my list.
So there you go. So we've got Kramer, who is hilarious. To me, for Seinfeld, I honestly think that he is the character that makes the show. Sure, Jerry's got his stuff.
I would tie him with George.
Yeah. Yeah, George. It's weird because like Jerry and Elaine are the weakest parts of the show. They're fine. They have good arcs sometimes, but it really is like the funniest stuff and the most notable stuff comes from one of those guys. And so I love Kramer. I love my favorite episode with him is when he's acting out all of the diseases that for these medical students. This doesn't have to do with being a neighbor, but that's my favorite Kramer episode. Is focus on that. I can't think of like the best example of Kramer as the annoying neighbor though, apart from just the generic he busts in through the door.
Well, that's kind of his whole shtick.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's not one that I'm thinking of that I'm like, this is the episode to encapsulate Kramer's neighborness. It's always there. It's always present. He busts in the door. Maybe he has news or he goes straight to the fridge and he just raids their fridge.
Yeah. Which, I mean, is kind of like Joey from Friends, but I didn't have Joey on my list because, I mean, that's a bit of a stretch. Yeah. Even though he is across the hall.
I had him as a mention because I did think to bring it. We should bring him up because, I mean, that is part of it, too, is that neighbor comes in, just doesn't knock, just goes right into your food, etc.
The hard part with Friends and Joey is that with all the rest of them on my list, there's like the central character who is like the star of the show, and then the neighbor is a supporting character. Whereas like all 6 of the friends, they're kind of all the main character. Joey's not like a supporting character he's not less important than Chandler and Monica or Rachel, whoever else was living there.
True. The more annoying neighbor in Friends is Mr. Heckles. He's the guy that we're talking about, a neighbor. He is the neighbor in that. Sure, maybe you could say the big ugly naked guy.
Ugly naked guy.
Yeah. Is it just ugly naked guy? I always like want to throw in more adjectives in there.
No, it's they call him ugly naked guy, although they do confirm that it's ugly. Part of the ugliness is his size, because they also do make fat jokes too.
There you go. So I think he needs about like 5 more adjectives. Big, ugly, voluptuous, sensitive guy. That's only 2. Sorry. I ran out. I left my thesaurus at home. But Mr. Heckles is I don't want to say he's unfunny, but understand what I mean when I say he's an unfunny Kramer. He would not be funny to us. If he lived right next door to you, you'd be like, I don't like this guy. In fact, restraining order is like at the tip of my fingers.
You know, it's funny, Mr. Heckles, I have heard this on a podcast I was listening to about Friends, that Mr. Heckles was only in 5 episodes, which you think he was in more. But part of it, I think, is because, at least back then, once you hit 6 episodes in a TV show, like your pay gets bumped up because you're like more of a really recurring character. So there's a number of characters in Friends. I think Susan is another one where they're in 5 episodes and then you never see them again. It's like, oh, there's your 5, gone, bye. Because really, outside of the main 6, who appears more than 5 times, I think it's like Mike, Jack, Judy, Gunther, Janice, and that might be it.
Yeah. Yeah, because Mr. Heckles, like, I know he's not in the later seasons.
No, he dies in season 2.
That would do it. I forgot that he died.
Well, he may have appeared later on in a flashback at some point. I think that could be possible.
But that makes me want to like take up a challenge. Like Joey's agent, she was in more than 5. I know it does, like, not a big part.
No, some of them were, but I know there are a number of them who were only in 5.
Okay. Because now I want to be like, oh, and this character, just bring up all these, like Charlie. Like, I know she had an arc. How many was Charlie in?
I don't know.
She had to have been in more than 5 because she was at the end of season 9 and beginning of season 10.
Well, I'm looking this up right now.
Aisha Tyler, where are you? All right.
I got her on speed dial. Yeah, while I'm doing that, you can actually why don't you talk about one of on your list? Do we want to go by the categories or just go over the lists?
Well, we'd already thrown out a couple, and then we can kind of jump back to categories in a second. But Frank and Marie,
she was in 8.
8, nailed it.
There's a bunch more. So was Estelle and Richard and Frank Jr. and even Julie. Yeah, okay. There are a bunch of them who are in more than 5.
There you go. Myth busted. So it's really funny with Frank and Marie is that I think they absolutely fit this trope, but I wouldn't put Robert in this trope, even though he lives with them.
No, I mean, there are maybe a few times when he does, but as a whole, they are the annoying neighbors. Like, I don't think it would have been as big a deal for Ray and Marie, or Ray and Deborah. That's what Marie wants. For Ray and Deborah, if it was just Robert who lived across the hall or across the street.
Yeah. I think a good episode to show off their neighborness was actually with the other neighbors, of them coming over when they were trying to talk to Ray to talk to them and get them out of there. And so when they filmed Frank getting the paper in the morning, and then Marie and Frank walk in on them. Mm-hmm. I think that's a great indication of the effect that they have as neighbors. Another good one fun one would be Marie driving through the house, but that's that's a different animal altogether.
Yeah. I mean, that's really all I gotta say, because without them living across the street, you have no show.
Yeah, obviously. Exactly. And that's where you get the conflict with a lot of these, is that when you have the annoying neighbor, it tends to be the source of conflict. Like if we look at, and I haven't watched this show too much, but I'm going to just throw us back in the flashback with Don Knotts from Three's Company. That he's the annoying neighbor where he's trying to constantly bust the lie of John Ritter and the ladies. And so he's constantly just waiting outside the door. It seems like from the stuff I've seen, seems like that's where he lives, is right outside the door.
Well, okay, actually this I can explain, and actually this will open up a couple different it will open up a couple different characters in a new category.
How you doing?
I have one more of. Yeah. Words are fun. So first, it was actually before Don Knotts. It was actually Mr. and Mrs. Roper, who were the landlords.
Okay.
And whole premise was, I mean, this is the 70s. People weren't as open minded. Is that in order for Jack to live with these two women, he had to pretend to be gay. Mm-hmm. And so that was the whole thing where he in front of them, he was doing the stereotypical gay stuff, probably doing jokes you could not do today on TV.
Probably.
Yeah. And then partway through, they left. I don't know what the storyline was. And then Don Knotts bought the property. So Don Knotts, as Mr. Furley was his name, was actually the landlord of the company. So that's why he was barging in, because he owned the place.
Yeah. And that kind of lends credence to this idea, like this trope. It feels like this trope was a bigger deal, especially back in the 70s, 60s, that there was the annoying neighbor where maybe it was a part of the Cold War era of the spy on your neighbor. You don't know what your neighbor's doing. Mm. You look across the way sort of thing. Cause I didn't have these on my list, but just as I'm talking, both Addams Family and Munsters had that really, it was birthed out of that idea, mocking the, hey, don't be spying on your neighbors, because you know what? They can be weird and they can be off-putting, but they might be the more normal than you are. They might be the most nicest family you've ever met. And just because they look weird doesn't mean that they are that sort of person. So I know that we had that big then, but I don't know if that's the whole reason it died out, or if it was just people got sick of it. What do you think, Brad?
I think it just kind of died out. I think when done well, it could be really good. And I have another example going into this too, but yeah, that was really, when you get to the 50s and 60s TV shows, it really started to, everything was kind of built into these molds, and the nosy neighbor was really part of that mold. And I think in the 70s, they started to kind of actually experiment and break out and kind of have new kinds of TV shows.
Yeah.
But the one I was going to add was, do you remember 2 years ago I had you watch one episode of One Day at a Time?
Yes.
So again, Schneider is the landlord of that show. But he's also kind of unofficially part of the family, and he'll barge in. And it's they all love him, and sometimes he's welcome. When it's big serious moments, they welcome him. But sometimes he just barges in hey, I'm part of the family. And they're all sitting there go home. It's both.
And that feels when I watched One Step at a Time, they really were trying to capture that classic sitcom feel. It felt like. And so that's what I was walking away with. And to have a character like that makes sense, because in a more modern sitcom like New Girl, I can't think of a neighbor character from New Girl. The closest we got is the homeless guy outside, and I wouldn't count him in that category.
Yeah, no, not really.
Or some of the more mockumentaries like Parks and Rec and Office and Mike Schur shows. We don't have these neighbor characters in there.
It's because it's set in a workplace. It's not their home.
True. But yeah, you're right. But I do think that we've gravitated away from it, because I just think that we as a culture are a little more isolated. And if you look at your neighbors, how well do you know your neighbors? If there was a TV show done about your life, would your neighbors be a recurring role on it? Or would they just be faceless people that maybe there's one or two episodes you bump into them?
Maybe a few episodes. Although my neighbor, I will say that whenever I go out of town, he's the one who comes over and feeds my cat.
What a guy. That's nice of him. Do you ask him what he feeds it, or you're just hey, I'm not picky as long as she doesn't die? Or he. I don't know the gender of your cat. I'm sorry.
It's a he. I usually have a bit of food. He knows where it is right there. He just goes in and makes sure it's fed and checks the water and litter and stuff.
Way to go.
There
you are. But yeah, then so it does feel like an old thing, which it's funny because even a modern show, I can't call this modern, it's 20 years ago, but that 70s show, because it takes place in the 70s, I felt like they had to do the next door neighbor thing, but they took it a step further too. I wouldn't consider Donna in that neighbor trope,
no,
but she Bob is the next door neighbor girl trope, because that's a different trope too, the love of your life, next door neighbor, we grew up together sort of thing. So,
but Bob would be, because you don't really know any of the other main characters' parents, other than they maybe appeared in one episodes here and there. But Bob, and for a while Midge too, is a good part of the show.
Yeah. And Bob's a great character. There's annoying neighbors that really are annoying, which we can talk about in Full House in a second. So I know what's on your, I know some that are on your list, and then
yes, you do.
But like, he is annoying, but it's really powerful. It's really good writing when you are able to write an annoying character that's not annoying themselves. And I don't feel like Bob gets across that line, except for maybe in some of the last seasons when he has to get thrust more to the center because they're just dropping cast members left and right.
Yeah. And I did like, even though the show itself had its flaws, I liked his episode in that 90s show when he came back. Because when they announced that, I'm like, you have to have Bob in there. He's the other grandpa. You have to have an episode where you find out like the dynamic between Bob and Red being this girl's grandparents.
Yes, 100%.
But I mean, it was good. It was one episode, and then we could say bye to Bob.
Yeah. So that's an example of an annoying character, annoying neighbor done well. What's some of the other ones that you want to talk about?
Well, do we want to go into stick with the annoying ones, or do we want to go into the wise neighbors?
Let's stick with the annoying ones. Let's talk about the good ones and the bad ones.
Okay. Well, I mean, you mentioned Full House, so yeah, obviously the one who is Kimmy Gibbler, who comes in. Well, she's there from the beginning, but she kind of gets more established as the annoying neighbor a few seasons in. I mean, because she's DJ's best friend, and when it comes down to it, they do like her, and she's around for part of the serious moments, and she has a couple serious moments. For the most part, she bursts in the back door and says, "Hola, Tanneritos," and it's like everything is weird about her. She always has loud colors, the running gags that her feet smell, and it's just, she is like the color to the Tanner family, kind of just being bland, normal people.
Yeah. And from the few episodes I've seen, I'm not a Kimmy Gibbler fan. I feel like she's given the laziest lines for that mocking sort of humor. I guess I don't have a lot of respect for. I'm so sorry for Full House fans. I don't have a lot of respect for this show. The 4 episodes that I've watched, I'm like, why was this popular? I didn't click with me. Maybe it was just I was at the wrong age when I finally saw it to begin with.
It could have been, yeah.
It's overtly schmaltzy and not very funny, and so there's nothing about Kimmy.
There are a few episodes here and there. I mean, out of the characters, I think Kimmy's one of the characters I like the most because they actually gave her a personality. Like it or hate it, I mean, Bob Saget as a person was more interesting. Bob Saget as Danny Tanner, his thing was neurotic dad who loves to clean. That's it. That's not that interesting.
And he also will always have the right wisdom. By the end of the episode, Danny has done the right thing and told his girls how to do the right thing.
Well, sometimes it could come from Uncle Jesse or some other character too. It doesn't always have to be Danny.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, all the episodes I've seen, it's been Danny. So he's the guy who has the conversation.
It probably happens to him more often than the other ones. And unless you have more in Full House, we can probably shift into another TGIF show that really more exemplified the crazy neighbor, which was Steve Urkel on Family Matters.
I was going to say, is it the most polarizing TV show of all time? Because honestly, there's no middle ground in this show. Urkel is a love it or hate it character, and so much of the show became about him that you either enjoy Family Matters a lot or you hated it.
But at the same time, this show would not have lasted 9 seasons without Steve Urkel because he wasn't in the beginning, and the beginning is really kind of getting them to show their own footing. It's kind of, I think their thing was, let's make it like a blue collar Cosby Show because it's like an all black cast, but instead of the parents being a doctor and a lawyer, it's an elevator operator and a cop in the late 80s. But then when they brought Steve Urkel in for the one episode, they showed like this character can bring tons of humor, and he has unique relationships with Carl and Laura and Eddie. So it's just, I mean, there would not be 9 seasons of the show without Steve Urkel. Whether you think that's a good thing or bad thing is up for debate.
Yeah. The commitment Jaleel White gave to the physical performances is admirable.
Oh, yeah.
100%. Like he took the script that he had and he just ran with it in his physical comedy.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's good comedy. It just means he committed to the bit and like did more with what he had than anyone else would have been able to in that.
Well, and So early on, when he was still pretty young, they did an episode where they made him be Myrtle Urkel, his cousin. They made him be like a weird girl, and afterwards, I guess he was really sensitive about it. Was like having a hard time with it because he was like being made fun of, that kind of stuff. And so I guess Jaleel White's dad told them like, "We're not doing that again. He's not going to be that character again." But then way later, like 4 or 5 seasons later, Jaleel White was older and more like responsible and kind of sure of himself. And he himself walked into the writer's room and was like, if you want to do another Myrtle episode, that's fine. I guess they all were like, yeah, that's awesome. So then there's like a 4-year gap, and then boom, they have another episode of Myrtle come back as the cousin. And then they had him be Stefan, which is like they altered his DNA to make him cool, which is basically just he could be acting as himself. So basically, he played multiple characters.
I would have cheered for him in that moment too, because like what that means in my eyes is like this guy was hurt and was sensitive about something, and he's willing to face it and face this pain that he's had in the past, and be like, I'm gonna nail it this time. I'm like, that's good personal character growth. So I would have been plotting for him too.
Also, everybody knows about Steve Urkel's catchphrase, "Did I do that?"
Do you know the teen or the 20-something-year-olds in New Girl that Jess befriended didn't know about it? We just watched that episode the other night.
That's true. I forgot about that. But do you know any of Steve Urkel's other catchphrases? Because that was the big one, but they actually gave him a number of catchphrases.
You only need one. What are they doing?
He also very frequently said, "Got any cheese?" And then after, a lot of times, sometimes after he clearly caused problems or messed something up, he would look at someone else saying, "Look what you did."
I think that one rings a bell.
Or another one, and this happened very often, this was mostly with Carl. He was saying, "Go home, Steve. Go home, go home, go home." And Steve would like, I don't have to take this. I'm going home. Like, why does one character need so many catchphrases?
I want to talk about another neighbor from a black cast TV show. I think it's probably TGI Friday, but this one I actually enjoyed. I liked Mo Tibbs from Smart Guy. Now,
good call.
That's a show I haven't watched for a long time. I just remember he wasn't the annoying neighbor. He was just a present neighbor. He was a really good friend to.
Was he the neighbor, or was he just his friend?
Maybe he was just a friend. I thought he lived next door. He embodies neighbor personality. Yeah. He gives off neighbor energy. Let's put it that way. So if I'm cheating here, I apologize. It's been a while since I saw this, but I was just thinking about like Mo was my favorite character. He have so many good lines. I like Tej a lot too, and the dad. So those three were the trifecta. But I really enjoyed Mo. He had some great storylines, some great lines. Too bad I can't give you some specifics right now because I thought we were doing Sister City.
Okay. Well, Mo also, going back to Family Matters, it's very similar to the character Waldo. I don't know if you know who Waldo is. He's Eddie's best friend, who basically the whole thing is he's dumb, he's a good cook, and he's nice. It's his three. That all you need to know about Waldo.
Well, you also need to know where to find him.
That's true. Where's Waldo?
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for saying the joke out loud. That made it better.
Yes. So I think one more that would kind of fit into this category, or maybe two more. Beans from Even Stevens.
That was one I'd thought of, and I had forgotten about it, so I'm glad you brought him up.
Yep, and I don't know if he's exactly a neighbor, but he lives in the neighborhood, and he basically was just kind of like Urkel, where he would just show up all the time. Like sometimes welcome and part of the gang, sometimes he's the annoying one. Because he was a little bit younger than the kids. So he wasn't always just part of the gang unless they needed him.
Yeah.
And he was always, again, kind of like Kimmy Gibbler. He's the weird one. You never knew what he was actually going to be up to. Like they did a whole episode where they suspect he's an alien. Then it turns out he's not. But then maybe he is. Because
he was typing in web dings was one of the things. Boy, the triggers that you get for like the random memories, like, oh my gosh, I haven't thought about it since I've seen it 20 years ago.
Yeah. And it's crazy like what Beans looks like now. Like he looks like, I don't know, he did respectively, he does not age very well. That's all I'm going to say.
Unrespectively, he didn't age well at that time either. He was like, when you saw him as a kid, you're like, life's not going to be nice to this guy.
Yeah. It worked when he was 8. Not so much when he's like, what, 30 something? He's probably a little younger than us, I think.
You know who did age really well and had a complete physical transformation?
Who?
One of the bullies from Boy Meets World.
Ethan Suplee.
That's it. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
If you look him up, a guy from Remember the Titans, Ethan what? Suplee?
Ethan Suplee, yeah.
Supley?
Suplee.
Lee. Okay. Yeah, look him up. Look up the before and after. If you see like what he looks like in movies, you'll be like, oh yeah, I recognize him. And then he was like in Dog recently, the Channing Tatum movie like 2 years ago.
Yeah. On the Pod Meets World, they did a live show and they actually reunited Frankie, Joey, and Harley Kiner, all the actors all together for the first time. Those three haven't been together since Boy Meets World, and they were together on this show, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, that would have been a great segue. But I know you had another annoying neighbor. I've got one more annoying neighbor that is, again, he's not a bad annoying neighbor to me. He's actually a really funny character. But The Simpsons, Ned Flanders.
Yep, Flanders, that was mine.
There we go. He is like the supposed to be annoying for the characters, but for us they do him in such a good way. Plus there's a lot, because it's The Simpsons and there's so many characters and they do so many different arcs and so many different stories. He's gotten his own centric stories before, and there's been some really good Ned centric stories, and so he's a great character. He is able to be a mockery of the most fundamentalist Christian beliefs without going too far. You know, like there's some people that like they go so far into it. It's like now you really were hurt by the church, but because of how Simpsons is, it's just like anything's up for grabs. So mocking the fundamentalist Christianity thing, one of my favorite little jabs at that is when he's reading to his kids and he's reading Harry Potter. He's like, and then Harry Potter and all his wizard friends went straight to hell for practicing witchcraft, and he throws the book into the fire. Great Ned line.
There's two memories I have of Ned Flanders. One is it's just a small little moment. Like Homer was mad at him or something and took the hose and was going to like spray him down with freezing cold water in the winter. And it just came out, the water froze as it came out of the hose.
Yeah.
And he's like, ooh, a popsicle is my favorite flavor. Plain.
Or he has his mustache ripped off. He's like, quick, go get the non-alcoholic rubbing alcohol.
And then wasn't there an episode where Bart hung out with Flanders and kind of became like a mini Flanders for an episode?
Yes. Yep. Correct. I don't have more information than that just to confirm that episode happened.
Also, imagine this. So take Flanders and turn him into a real live human person. Who do you get?
Ted Lasso.
Yes, you get Ted Lasso. Visually, when I saw Ted Lasso, I thought, are they doing a Flanders thing? I mean, they're not exactly the same. I don't think they were trying to, but it's Ted Lasso is what it is.
That's the other thing that they do really well with Ned is that like he is such a patient man. I know that some of the Ned centric episodes that's tested, and you know it has to be because if you're focusing on one character, you got to give him a character flaw. But overall, like some of the stuff that Homer puts him through, and he just turn the other cheek to the next level. It's like I, in some ways, kind of want to be like Ned. I want to be able to like have that level of patience because the man is a saint in that way, but
he is.
Definitely has his flaws for sure.
So that's all. Well, I suppose the only one I have that left that kind of goes into the annoying neighbor is actually on a recent show making fun of the trope itself, which was Agatha from WandaVision.
Correct. Really good character. That the writing's good, but it's also the way Catherine Hahn played her was fantastic.
Oh
as
yeah,
well.
Catherine Hahn is fantastic.
Yeah, and that you're right. That character existed without spoiling like what happens later in the season. But
the show was on 3 years ago. I think it's okay to spoil it.
No, it's not. But it seemed like the character was created just to fill that trope. And when Catherine Hahn would pop in, she would just like to the letter, like what you would expect from the formula of having her as that annoying neighbor and the pesky, let me look over the binoculars and etc.
I think there's two types of people. There's people who read the comics and people who didn't see it coming.
I mean, she had a different name in the episode, but like it was close.
Yeah, I mean, when I found out about it, because I'm not a comic person, and if I knew that was the name of an important character in the, like, it would be a slam dunk.
Yeah, well, they gave her a moniker, but it was close to the name.
Yeah.
I think
it's like, that's not Tony Stark, it's Tony Schmark.
It's not
totally
that.
different guy.
Okay.
They changed it a little bit.
I think it would do a disservice, because we've talked about the history of this. We've talked about going back. It would do a disservice to not mention Fred and Ethel from I Love Lucy.
Yeah, good call.
There's a number of like these quintessential neighbors from way back in those old sitcoms, but I feel like Fred and Ethel legitimize the trope, if I can say it that way. I think that when you look back at who are these classic annoying neighbors and that are overbearing and sticking their nose probably where it doesn't belong, Fred and Ethel are the number one candidates for that.
I think so too. Yeah, and I should be on a list. I totally forgot about it until now.
You're welcome. That's what happens when you got a guy who doesn't remember what episode we're doing in the night. He just pulls out things like Fred and Ethel. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's talk about like the good neighbors too, because there's the other side of it where it's like, this is the guy or the girl who gives you the good advice. This is the ones like, I just had the conflict of the episode. We're in the finale of the second act, beginning of the third act of the show. I need to know what I'm doing. They go.
Well, this one I don't have as many. I only have two, and I'm sure you have the same two. Because I'm not sure if you have more than that.
I've got two. Yeah.
Yep, it's the same two, I'm sure. Well, one of them is my namesake on this StreamYard here. We can pick names, which is Wilson from Home Improvement.
Yeah. Wilson. Oh wait,
I've heard that the inspiration of Wilson only having his, on top of his face shown, was that Tim Allen, remember when he was a kid, because he was, smaller looking up, he would only see the top of his neighbor's face.
Yeah. And that became a running gag. Like, I know that was always how it was intended to be with him. And so, he's just behind the fence, and that's what it is. He's behind the fence. You hear him talking, you just see the top of his face. But there are times when you see Wilson out in the wild, like in the native areas. And so then they would come up with different camera angles. Like they had him as Mark did like this one Halloween short film that he did, and so he got Wilson to be a part of it, and so they blocked his face with like a test tube beaker in the science lab. And then there was another time Tim bumps into Wilson at a restaurant, and there's a cup of coffee, and they do like a low angle, and so his face is poking over the coffee, but it's low there to hide Wilson's face. So they play with that as the gag, but.
And then in the final episode, some shows did this where, like Philadelphia House did this after the final episode of the show. They did like a curtain call where like, hey, here is Tim Allen. They bring in all the cast. And at that one, at the very end of the last episode, he walked in showing his face, and he like did that, like the Home Alone on his cheeks, showing like, hey, look, it's my face. Look. And Wilson,
I'm here.
He was in a ways the weird neighbor. He was always into these weird Native American spiritual stuff, but that was never the butt of the joke. They were never really making fun of Wilson. It was like, oh yeah, Wilson's into some weird stuff. But he would always be the one, like you said, to mostly likely to Tim, but I think at different times he gave other people advice. Just like, hey, you should really be nice to your family or whatever. I mean, they were more specific than that.
Yeah. I mean, they didn't make fun of him, his personality. Like Tim would have a one-liner just to kind of joke about the thing that he'd bring up. He talked about, like, he quoted Mark Twain once, and it was a Samuel Longhorn Clemens, and Tim's like, the chicken from Looney Tunes? Which is Foghorn Leghorn, making that connect. So it's like, Tim would kind of mock the thing he'd bring up, but is like, the other side of the gag of Wilson is that he's just so well-read and so well-traveled. And so when Tim would give him his problem, like, there's an old Chinese proverb, or in Ethiopia, there's a tribe that does this, or like just some random off the wall, like, where do you get this information and how do you know this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, did they ever say, what did Wilson do for a job?
Just know things. He was actually God. So,
it's funny. I saw a little clip of Patricia Richardson, who played Jill, and she was talking about, as someone was asking her, I heard rumors about if you're going to do a Home Improvement reboot. And she went on this whole list. She's like, no one ever talked to me about it. I talked to Jonathan Taylor Thomas. No one talked to him about it. She said, the actor who played Brad as a felon. Mark hasn't acted since he was a kid. Wilson's dead. There's no way they can do any reboot. She's like going down character by character why they can't do a reboot of Home Improvement. She mentioned everybody except for Tim and Al.
Yeah, Richard Karn would do it.
I think he would. I think him and Tim Allen were probably the only ones who would do it.
So what they need to do instead of a Home Improvement reboot, they just need to do a Tool Time.
That's true. And get Debbie Dunning.
There you go. Or Pamela Anderson if they want to go deep cut.
Yeah, true.
All right. Well, the other one to mention, this is a little bit of a cheat too, because like we've talked about mentors and we've talked about teachers, and that's Mr. Feeney. But Mr. Feeney got to also be the next door neighbor to Corey Matthews and the Matthews family in Boy Meets World. So we double dip a little bit with him because we saw him in the classroom, but we also saw him there. And there was a number of really pinnacle scenes that happen outside the house as they're just talking at their fence line.
More so in the earlier years, because he does live next to the Matthews the whole 7 years. Mm-hmm. But especially as they get older and they spend less time at home in the Matthews house, you see Feeney there less.
Yeah.
But I think you get it a lot in like the first half of the show where he'd always be gardening, and then there'd be standing at the fence. And at one point, Eric is actually confused. He's like, what are you doing? If you're not at school, you have to be here gardening. What else are you doing? Kind of like making the trope. Like, that's the only places we see Feeney. School and at the fence.
Which, for the amount of gardening that Feeney does, you'd think he'd have a bigger backyard.
You think so? Yeah.
He has a sliver. That's all his yard is. About 20 total feet if you take everything in consideration.
But it is very well landscaped.
It's super well. But the proximity of him and the neighbor, we do get the why am I blank? What's Will Friedle's character's name?
Eric.
You just said it. We do get Eric's like, Finny! Because he'll always go out there, call him out. He comes out of the house. Sometimes he yells. So there's like, I think the one time when he screams and then Mr. Feeney just like stumbles out of the house in his robe, like a fire is going on. Like, what is it?
At one point he goes, you are not calling a duck.
Oh, man. And Mr. Feeney's such a great character, and so it makes sense that they gave him dual roles: be the teacher in the classroom and the neighbor at the house.
Yeah. There was one episode in Girl Meets World where it's toward the end. I think it was the last episode where they opened the door, and it was like the legacy that they brought back like everyone they could from Boy Meets World back to like give advice on something, and they had an Eric Feeney moment like later where they're like, "I'm not talking to you. I'm not talking to you." Fine. And then Feeney goes, double fine. And Eric's like, I taught you that. And Feeney goes, yeah, and I taught you everything else. He's like, then how come I don't know anything? It's a good Eric Feeney exchange.
Yes. Oh man, Eric.
But sorry.
Was that one of our top 5 when we did our relationship ranking? Was that in our top 5?
It was in our top 3.
Okay, I thought it was pretty high.
Yeah, it was. Because I remember, actually, I recently listened to that episode.
Yeah, those two
sometimes
together
when I'm bored, I'll listen to our old episodes.
Hey, does anyone in Gilmore Girls count? Because the whole town is neighbors. Like that's
actually yes.
The whole concept is everyone is a small town. They're all neighbors with each other.
But specifically next to Lorelai is Babette and Maury. Babette is Sally Struthers.
Oh yeah,
she's one of the. The busybodies who's always. I mean, there's a lot of times she I don't know if that's her normal voice, but she has the raspy voice. Like, hey, sweetie, how's that going? Like that's how she talks.
Keep going. I like this.
Yeah, and the whole thing is that she's short, and her husband is like 6'2". Her husband is Ted Rooney, but they like modified the house to be for a short person, and basically it's like he's constantly ducking around the house the whole time. Like a few times they show her house.
Yeah,
but. If there was a specific neighbor in Gilmore Girls, it would be Babette and Maury. But yeah, you're right. The whole town is kind of like everyone in is in everyone's business.
Except for Lorelei's parents, because they live a little bit away. But yeah, it's...
Yeah, well, and all the people, like all of Rory's classmates in Paris. And,
Yeah.
like, there's a whole subset of characters.
True.
It's basically there's the rich people, and then there's Stars Hollow.
I'm sure they'll love that classification.
I mean, it's if you watch the show, it really is.
No, you're right.
On the rich people side, you got the Gilmores, the Yale people, the Chilton people. You know.
Yeah.
Aren't you glad that you watched all 7 years and now you can get these references?
I love it. It's great.
And you can't even blame me because you did it yourself.
I guess you're right. Thanks, Brian, for keeping me honest.
Anytime.
I mean, we can still talk. We can go back to talking about Tim Allen because he did the same thing. It's like Tim Allen draws from the same well. So when he did Last Man Standing, he's like, I need to do a neighbor guy again. Except for this one was a more antagonistic relationship. I can't remember what the character's name is. I was just Chuck. Yeah, him and Chuck is pretty much like. Can you get more opposite? You have a white Republican man, but although it'd make it different as if it was Chuck was a woman, black Democratic woman, but. They play off that antagonism, like that. They still are good friends. They still are neighbors. They appreciate each other, but they're gonna make fun of each other.
Yeah, and Last Man Standing kind of was the Home Improvement reunion because Patricia Richardson, Richard Karn, and Jonathan Taylor Thomas were all in different episodes of Last Man Standing, as well as there was one. I think I mentioned this where they did the whole Tim Allen is on screen as two different characters, and it's Tim Taylor from Michigan is coming to visit Mike Baxter, and it's like they're talking to each other next to each other. As it not pretending they're not the same actor, just for the sake of, hey, it's funny.
Hey, wait a second.
And in that episode, they had the Tim Taylor version of him talked about his neighbor Wilson, who he missed, who died because the actor who played Wilson died a long time ago.
Hey, we talked about. I think we talked about this. I think I brought it up. But how we said that like Mike Schur shows don't have a neighbor. Could we consider Mindy in The Medium Place to be the neighbor?
If there was going to be a neighbor, I'd say yeah.
Here I am grasping at straws. I'm like, I know we could probably wrap up the episode, but I want to find as many examples as we can.
But Mindy is a reverse because instead of the neighbor barging into the main character's house, it's always the main character's barging into Mindy's house.
That's very true.
Usually while she's naked.
Well, I doubt she wears clothes too much.
No. But I mean, if you... Never mind.
No, let's unpack this, Brian.
All right. You lived in your own world with nobody else around, like you're literally the last person on Earth, what does it matter if you're wearing clothes? Except for when, Kristen Bell and Ted Danson show up every now and then.
Is this a problem for you? I'm so tired of them popping by. I'm like, if Dax Shepard or nothing.
Yeah.
I think we left out I could either sound really stupid or really smart right now because I didn't watch the show. But on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, character named Jazz, isn't he?
I thought of him. I don't know if he's a neighbor or not. In fact, I don't think he is. And but he kind of does have the same kind of thing to the point where a running gag is that Uncle Phil will throw him out of the house.
Yeah.
And actually, fun fact, I don't know how I never noticed this, but the whole 6 years, they always use the same one shot of him. Like, it's the outdoor shot of him flying out the door. And so because they use the same shot, every time there's an episode where he gets thrown out, he's wearing that shirt.
You've said this before, but I admire the commitment to that. Like, we're not going to film this again. So you have your get thrown shirt.
Yeah. So you could like watch it and that. Yeah. It's the thing where like Jazz is Will's friend and everybody except for Will doesn't want him around, or nobody other than Will wants him around. It's a better way to say that.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Yeah. Do the Muppets have a neighbor?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't, because again, there's no like central location really. I mean, the Muppet Show had the stage, but there's really no neighbor. I've even tried to think of the 2015 show.
Yeah. Or I mean, technically in the Electric Teeth one, their neighbors were what? Danny Trejo and like, didn't they live across the street? Something like that.
Yeah. You mean Electric Mayhem?
Like,
he's in Electric Teeth.
what did I say? Electric
You
teeth.
said, you said electric.
Listen, if you kiss enough spark plugs, you too can have electric teeth.
Are you saying this from experience?
Maybe. Get off my back about it.
You know what? What you do in your own time is your own business.
That's fair. We've reached the unscripted portion of our podcast, which means I'm getting the wrap it up signal from my own brain. So let's go ahead and jump into trivia, because I think that's it for our neighbors.
Me too. So last week we had Paul and Mike on. We talked about our best sidekick bracket, and the winner was, go back and listen to that episode and you'll find out who it was.
Ta-da!
Yeah. Along the way, we talked about Bill Fagerbakke, who played both Patrick Star, the voice of Patrick Star on SpongeBob, one of the names on our list, as well as he was Marshall Erickson's dad, Marvin Erickson, who Marshall was also on our list. And we talked about Bill Fagerbakke also played sidekick on the show Coach in the late 80s, early 90s. What was his character's name? And his character's name was Dauber. I believe it was Michael Dauber Dubinsky.
At least it wasn't Jeffrey Dauber. All right, well, we talked about our good buddy Wilson from Home Alone, played by, I don't know how to pronounce it. I've only seen it written.
Home Improvement, not Home Alone.
What did I say? Home Alone.
You said Home Alone.
Guys, it threw me off that we're not talking about Sister City tonight. Everything is messed up. All right. So from Home Improvement, thank you. Tell me if I'm pronouncing his name right, but Earl Hindman. Is that right?
I'm not sure if it's Hindman or Hinman, but we're going
to call him Hindman because it's
Earl Hindman.
Like we're talking like his butt. So Earl Hindman was in a movie, and we brought up a character or an actor, joking a couple minutes ago, Ted Danson. So what movie were Earl Hindman and Ted Danson in together? This was the first time.
Not Home Alone.
It's not Home Alone. This was the first time when I saw this movie. My mom's like, "Hey, that's Wilson. You want to see what he looks like without the fence?" I'm like, "Wilson." That's how I said it too.
That's you as a kid.
Wilson. Matt, it's time to go to bed. Bed. Okay.
Why am I laughing? This is not even that funny.
I don't know. I'm just going with the bit. I'm just gonna embrace it until it dies. All right. I'm kind of like Lenny from Of Mice and Men. It's what he does. All right. Well, that is our story, and we're sticking to it. Next week, we are talking about Sister City. So I've got really great stuff planned for that we didn't do tonight. So make sure you check it out. But I think I did all right. I think I managed through this pretty well with very little preparation. So if you disagree, let me know. Actually, don't let me know. Let Brian know. You guys can talk about it.
Sounds good.
Until next time, I'm Matt.
I'm Brian.
And we're reminding you to stay tuned and keep watching.